When we talk about positive youth development, it's a really broad topic, and at the kind of theoretical level, it's talked about as programs, policies, and practices. So programs are specific ways that you can build positive youth development into what you're doing. Practices are kind of your everyday things, and that's what we're really going to focus on today. And policies would be, you know, getting youth voice on the board of directors of your organization, or things that make it really sustainable. But what I want to really focus on is how you can think about positive youth development and have it inform your interactions with the young people that you work with. So the way I really like to think about positive youth development is acknowledging that every interaction that you have with each individual person that you work with is an opportunity to contribute or detract from that person's development, right? So whether you're passing in the hall, or you run into them at the grocery store, or you've pulled them out for a behavior management conversation, or they come to you for extra support on a homework assignment, any individual interaction, you as a mentor, as an adult, as someone that this young person looks up to, you have the ability to add or detract from that young person's development. So positive youth development is kind of acknowledging that and being very, very intentional about taking advantage of every single one of those opportunities so that you are continuing, all of us, the sphere of influence around a young person. All of the adults in a young person's life are intentionally trying to help that young person develop in a positive way. That's the real crux of positive youth development. And so we're going to just talk a little bit about what that looks like and some strategies for incorporating it into your practice as you become facilitators with young people. Knowing that not everybody is going to end up working ultimately with young people, but I think you'll see a lot of the concepts still apply. So the government has defined positive youth development in our federal program with this definition here. But basically, again, recognizing that multiple domains of a young person's development are all interconnected. So while you're focusing on academics, you are also working with that person's character and their moral compass. So, you know, making sure that you are acknowledging that all of these pieces of development are happening at once, and how do you set up your activities? How do you facilitate in a way that addresses all of these areas of development, or several of them, and not doing each in isolation. The other piece of this is that, and we talked about it a little bit just now as we were debriefing the facilitation conversation, is that young people have like prior strengths and knowledge. So how do you tap into that? How do you help them? They are the experts in their own learning style, in their own life experience. Every one of them is going to bring their own perspective and experience to the table. How do we honor that? And how do we build on it? And the first part is really recognizing it and helping them to recognize what they bring to the table, and doing that in the open so we can intentionally build on those things. And then again, young people are active agents of their own growth. So you can't, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make one drink, right? So you can certainly give a student a book, but you can't make them read and learn. You have to engage them in a way that makes them want to buy into what you're selling. So adolescence is a time of tremendous growth, right? This always strikes me, and not to get too morbid here, but you know, as adolescents, and we're talking about 9 to 25 in general. So I'm a part of an organization called Colorado 9 to 25. If any of you have ever heard of that, it's a collective impact organization in the state that really works to promote positive youth development both amongst youth-serving organizations and in public schools. So we'll have some resources on that later. But one of the things that really strikes me is that at the healthiest time in a person's life, we're at most risk for death and disease. And part of that is because, you know, while our bodies are formed healthily, our brains are not. And that's that crazy time where your body has advanced further than your brain has. And so you aren't the best decision maker, right? You maybe don't wear your seatbelts or practice safe sex. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why these rates are so high. All adolescence, again, as a time of change, there are some very specific tasks that all young people go through as they transition from childhood to adulthood. All of us in the room included. And what, I'm gonna just pull them up here. So adjusting to physical changes. So obviously hormones, bodies changing, girls are attractive, boys are attractive, everything's a distraction. You're crying and you don't know why. You forgot to shower and now you smell bad. There's all of these things that young people are dealing with, right? So that alone is just a lot on their plate. So we're going to keep adding to the plate here. But adjusting to physical changes is hard. It's awkward. It's pimples and BO and all kinds of stuff, right? So just keep in mind that the young people you work with are navigating that. And I think as we all think back to what that was like for us, kind of weird, right? So use that as a lens to inform your interactions. Again, sexually maturing body and feelings. Your relationships with people of the same and opposite sex are changing. And how does that factor in to the behaviors that you're seeing at your sites with the students that you're working with? How does that inform their relationships with you as near peers in some cases? Some of you are going to be working with students who are maybe 3, 4, 5 years younger than you. And so there's going to be some weird stuff there. And I think being cognizant of that is really important as a facilitator. So developing an abstract thinking skills. Obviously this is human development 101, but being able to connect the dots looks differently for young people than it does for you. I'm sure it looks differently for me right now than it does for my mother. Certainly for my mother. But you know, this is a process that we all continue to build and learn over time. So just know that some of the young people that you work with maybe don't connect the dots as easily or in the same way that you do, and you're going to have to tailor your communications with them accordingly and your expectations accordingly. A personal sense of identity is kind of the same thing. So they're trying to feel out who they are in the world. What are my values? What is the image I'm hoping to project to my peers, to my family, to my community, to my teachers? And how does that, again, affect the relationship that they have with each other and you as a mentor, facilitator? This is a big one, renegotiating relationships with caregivers. We talk about this a lot in the terms of behavior management. So we all know as young people, you have to rely on adults for permission, for money, for basic needs, for shelter, for food. And as you transition to adulthood, these are things that you do yourself. And you know, it's not like you graduate high school and then all of a sudden you wake up the next morning and you're like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to pay my own bills and think about taxes and go shopping and buy healthy food. So it's a process. And a lot of that is learning or establishing your own autonomy. So a lot of times when you're getting pushback from a student or what you perceive to be disrespect, that may be them trying to renegotiate their relationship with caregivers in general. And what you're seeing is just a byproduct of that. And so you as people in a position of authority, you're going to get the brunt of some of that. And so there's, at the same time, we're testing our boundaries in other ways. And all of these things are coming together to give us this baggage that young people are carrying and navigating and negotiating. So that doesn't mean that you need to change your expectations, but the way that you think about it, maybe you should definitely be informed by these tasks. So develop stable and productive peer relationships is probably what that's supposed to say. Oh, it's a separate line. I don't do PowerPoints very well. And meeting the demands of increasingly mature roles and responsibilities. So these are the kind of scientifically identified 8 developmental tasks that all young people are going through simultaneously while they're doing whatever you're wanting them to do, which could be, doing a crafts project or doing a service learning project, or just stop talking while I'm talking, right? So be very cognizant of the fact that all of this is going on, how it informs your interactions with the young people, and how you can offer support and guidance as they kind of wander through these like muddy waters here. So quick activity. I want to just talk about how we define success. So as individuals, you in this room, if I were to ask any one of you, what does your definition of personal success look like? But it really helps me think about the fact that, I'm terrible at math. I don't use math very often. But the skills that I do use quite often are the ones that we just talked about, right? It's the skills that I use in my job, in my relationships, in my life, not just to feel successful, but to feel competent. I think they're essential. So again, PYD creates the environment where we can learn these skills, practice them. Anybody have dogs? So what happens when the dogs kind of keep running back and forth along the fence, right? So I think a lot about skill building as dogs running back and forth along the fence. You let the dogs into the yard, they run around a little bit, and no big deal. But after a while, they keep hitting that fence back and forth, and you have that little dirt trail that goes right in front of the fence. That's what practicing these skills is like. It's not going to be the first time, but the more that you give young people the opportunity to practice all of these things that we talk about, the more that it gets ingrained into who they are and how they interact with the world, and those skills will be there for them when they need them. So a lot of these we call the 21st century learning skills. This isn't all encompassing, but a lot of what we talked about you'll find in here. These are things that all of us need to be successful in the world. I think one of the things that we as an education system are now becoming very cognizant that the economy changes faster than the education system can change. So we pretty much know right now that you're not going to have to go do long division in your job as an adult on paper, right? You might not even have to be a good speller because we have spell check. So how do we prepare people for jobs that we may not even exist yet? For an economy that will look completely different when somebody who's 10 years old is 25 or 30. How do we make sure that they have the skills that they need to be successful regardless of what those jobs look like in 15 years? And these are, in addition to the things that we've already discussed, are what really will be important regardless of what the job. You know you're going to have to work well in a team situation. You know you're going to have to be an effective communicator, good at time management, knowing how to navigate information, being creative and adaptable. So these are the skills that we are hoping to have young folks. I love this activity because everybody hates it. And I think it's a really good reminder that we are asking young people to get out of their comfort zones every day. And the best way to do it is to demonstrate to them that you're willing to get out of your comfort zone as well. So while it is incredibly embarrassing and awkward to put yourself out like that in front of students or peers, I think it's really good practice. And it's a great way to demonstrate to the young people that you work with that you're not asking them to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. Because ultimately, until you build that trust with them, they're not going to care at all about what you have to say. So we like this Teddy Roosevelt quote. I'm sure you've all heard it. How are you going to demonstrate to the young people that you care? So I think a lot about my favorite movie of all time, The Karate Kid. You're a little younger audience, so does anyone want to admit that they haven't seen The Karate Kid and get publicly shamed by me?
I've seen the new version.
Terrible!
New version.
That does not count. That does not count. That movie's probably older than all of you, but I would go home and watch it if you haven't, at least 3 times. So those of you that have seen it, you know that this is Mr. Miyagi, this is Daniel-san. Daniel-san comes to Mr. Miyagi and he says, I want to learn how to do karate. I want to learn how to fight. I want to learn how to beat people up. I need you to help me. Miyagi, by this time, he had fixed his bike. He had given him a tree. He had really gone above and beyond to show Daniel that, you know, I care about you. I'm a nice guy. I want to build a relationship with you. You're important to me. You matter to me. And so Daniel-san says, okay, good. If I matter, then teach me how to fight. So he says, okay, I'll teach you. Come over to my house and bring a bucket, right? First thing he does is he has him wax the car and paint the fence and sand the deck. And Daniel-san doesn't know why he's doing all these things. He gets frustrated. He's out there till, you know, the wee hours of the night, waxing this old guy's car. He's like, what am I doing here? Doesn't get it. But then when his big fight comes, it's all those same skills that Miyagi hasn't practiced in. He has them all for his big fight because he trusted Miyagi to do that. He trusted Miyagi to teach him. He did what Miyagi said because he knew Miyagi cared about him. And so we want you guys to really be Miyagis. We want you to demonstrate to the young people that you care about them. And they're not always going to know that you're having them practice these skills, these skills of empathy, these skills of resilience, of reflection. They're not going to be able to connect the dots on why you're having them practice those skills. But ideally, those skills will burn a hole in the grass and be there for them in their big moment when they need them. So just think about that. Think about how do you put yourself in a position to impart these new skills on young people? How do you give them the opportunity to practice, even if they don't know that they're practicing, so that you can set them up for success to have those skills when they really need them, even though you probably won't be there to see it? So positive youth development has kind of 5 guiding principles. And a lot of them are things that really echo things we've been talking about all day, whether it's through service learning and what I talked about this morning, or facilitation, but really looking at strengths-based. How do you capitalize on the individual strengths of the young people that you're working with? How do you help them? And these are rhetorical questions because I don't know how to do it. These are things that you're going to have to figure out with each individual young person that you work with in your lives in general, beyond this summer, I think. But how do you help them really connect with their own strengths? How do you help them leverage their strengths in ways that build on those strengths so that they feel confident and I think when we talk about roles and responsibilities in service learning, that's a really big part of it. When we talk about age-appropriate activities in facilitation, that's a really big part of it. You want to set them up for success. You want to capitalize on what they already know and help them feel strong and powerful with these certain areas that they're good at. It's inclusive. I think when we talk about inclusivity, we talk about obviously ethnic, sexual orientation, gender identity, class. I mean, there's all kinds of isms. I think we want to be very respectful, and it ties in very well with strengths-based, of everybody's diversity and what each individual person brings, and the strength of the group is informed by the diverse strengths of each of its members. So thinking really about inclusivity in that regard is really important, but it's also important to be inclusive of every individual in the group. And that's a really important part of facilitation skills. If you've got, whether it's the disruptor who you need to engage in helping with a project or pulling out in the hall or getting them working on something else, whether it's the kid sitting alone at recess who doesn't look very happy. Positive youth development is making sure that the space feels safe for everybody, regardless of circumstance. So you as a facilitator, as an adult, it's your responsibility to be the keeper of that safe space. Part of that is addressing issues of exclusivity when they happen. So if you see what you perceive to be bullying and you ignore it, that's as damaging as the bullying itself, right? It offers some validation. So regardless of what else is going on in your day, or you're rushing down the hall to meet a deadline, or your boss says they need you here, right now, the most important thing will always be tending to the student's needs and making sure that it's a safe space for everybody. So you're never too busy to address issues of exclusivity. So that's a really important thing to remember. Collaborative. So positive youth development is collaborative. We want to talk with our peers, our colleagues, our supervisors about how are we creating this safe space? How are we planning in a way that promotes and keeps safe space? How are we engaging the young people in those conversations so that they feel a responsibility for keeping the safe space? How do we involve everybody in these conversations so that it's collective ownership over the vibe, if you will? Engaging youth as partners is another really important piece. We talk a lot about it in service learning and youth leadership, and it, again, ties in really good with collaboration and inclusivity and collaboration, strengths-based. But this, has anyone ever seen Roger Hart's Ladder of Young People's Participation? So this was originally from 1992, and for like 25 years, it stopped at rung 7. And I put this on here to talk about, at one point, they thought the pinnacle of youth engagement was turning decision-making over to youths, let them be leaders, and what happens will happen. Eventually, the kind of youth engagement community came to realize that the most positive benefits come from when we engage youth as partners. That's recognizing that they bring a certain set of experience and expertise, but so do we as adults. And how do we learn from them, allow them to learn from us, and have a truly reciprocal relationship? It can be challenging, particularly when you're one adult working with maybe 10 or 15 young people. But how can you set up your activities, your time with them in a way that engages them as partners? And lastly, we want to make it sustainable. So how do you ensure that we are allowing for these things to live beyond us? So that's where the policy piece comes into place. Is it, do we have a policy on our team that we're going to learn every young person's name when they come in the door, and we're going to use that name every day. So that when Tony or Jessica or Carlos comes in, I'm saying, "Hi Carlos, how are you? I know your name. You matter to me. You're a valuable part of this community, and I'm glad you're here." That simple step can go so far to making a young person feel welcome and a part of the space. So what policies need to be put in place for positive youth development to become part of how you do business at your site? Those of you that are going to 21st century sites, they hear this from me all the time. We make them come to trainings, and I tell them, we try and beat this into their heads. I'm sure Karen can attest. But maybe some of you will have the opportunity to bring some of this into your sites where it doesn't already exist and leave a lasting legacy beyond your term of service this summer. A couple things I want to touch on just real quickly are behavior management. So just the very basics of behavior management, you want to avoid power struggles. If you engage in a power struggle, you automatically lose. And if you refuse to engage in a power struggle, you automatically win. It's really that simple. And a power struggle could be who's going to get the last word. Or you want, somebody to use scissors instead of tearing. There's any number of things that you will ask a young person, and they're going to be like, "No." And if you get into that, "Well, no, I think you should, and this is why," then you're going to be into this back and forth. And as soon as you're in the back and forth, you've lost. You can't win in that situation with a young person normally. So what you will ideally will make the decision that you will make, and we will move on. And you and I can have this conversation later, and I will tell you why I asked you to do what I asked, and I will listen to you when you tell me why I did it, and we can have it as a conversation. But as soon as it turns into a back and forth power struggle, it's bad news. Obviously, don't lose your cool. It's a real easy thing to do. And those of you that have already worked with young people, you know that when it's getting towards the end of the day, maybe you didn't have a good lunch, maybe you didn't sleep well last night, maybe you've just had one of those days. But if you have buttons, young people will push them. That is a given. So how do you make sure that you are the calm, cool, collected, composed adult at all times? One thing is remembering those 8 developmental tasks. Remember why they're acting the way they are. Is the disrespect that you are feeling from a young person a product of them renegotiating their relationship with caregivers? Maybe they have some crazy stuff going on at home that you can't even imagine, and you will be faced with those situations for sure. Maybe, who knows? Maybe they have been bullied all day. Regardless, as a facilitator, as a staff member, it is inappropriate for you to ever, under any circumstances, raise your voice to a young person, say something disrespectful to a young person, lose your cool. And I'm sure you're going to hear this extensively from your site hosts, but it's a good thing to start trying to wrap your head around. If you need a few minutes, and you feel like you're at your breaking point with a class or an individual, then you need to have a backup plan ready to go. Do you have somebody that you can tag in and you tag out and get yourself a couple seconds of downtime? Think about how you as an individual handle those high stress situations. What coping skills do you have? You're going to need to practice them, because I can guarantee you all of you that are working with youth groups will be in these situations where you're very stressed out, there's a lot of commotion happening, and somebody's disrespectful, and your initial response is going to be to snap. to point your finger, to raise your voice, to squint your eyes, and that it's never gonna, that is the moment that you're detracting from a young person's development. Social media is another, so call for backup, we got through all that. Appropriateness. So, very basics of appropriateness. I think it's really particularly important for you guys as near peers to think about, social media. You probably all have Facebook. Maybe you guys are on Twitter and Instagram. You should know that the second you introduce yourself to a classroom of young people, 25% of them are going to pull out their phones and see if they can find you on Facebook. They're going to see if they can find you on Twitter. They're going to read through everything you've posted and everything that you've said. So if you have any concerns about that, I would check your privacy settings first thing. Make sure that you are putting out there what would be appropriate for the students that you serve to hear. You'll also start getting friend requests. Probably not appropriate to be Facebook friends with students that you're serving. Even if they're 17, 18, you're 21, 22, maybe there's, maybe you know them from outside of work. In the context of appropriate relationships in a school or community or organization setting, not appropriate to be Facebook friends with the students that you're working with. And that's kind of mentorship versus friendship, right? You are a mentor. You are somebody who is there to provide guidance, provide your expertise, and you're not there to be friends. I mean, you can be friendly, but we're not trying to get you to go make friends with every student that you serve, because when lines start to get blurred, that's where trouble happens. And I think you can read articles in the newspaper every day about crazy, inappropriate stuff that happens in schools. Teachers and students, coaches, former students, all of it. And there's landmines everywhere. So if you are ever in a situation where it turns into a he said, she said, by that point, it doesn't even really matter what happened. Because once the he said, she said starts, then you're tarnished. You're going to carry that. And so you need to make sure that you're identifying those situations long in advance and never putting yourself into a situation where it could be he said, she said. I worked in an after-school program for about 5 years before coming to the state at a middle school here in Denver. And we had a policy that, no staff member is ever alone with a student. Now, keep the door open or whatever, but that's where anybody can say anything that happened, and when it, again, becomes a he said, she said, it's too late. It's too late. The cat's out of the bag. So just think about that. And then also be very familiar with your host site policies. There's going to be a behavior management plan in place, ideally, at all of your sites already. Your first day, I'm sure they're going to walk you through a lot of this same stuff about appropriate interactions, about how they handle behavior management, about positive interactions with young people. But just be sure that you're really well versed in your host site policies. That's it. Do you guys have any questions on the positive youth development piece before I turn it over to Cheryl?